Hello everybody! So today we're going to be starting to talk about factoring by grouping. Now, yesterday we talked a little bit about finding a common factor and taking out the common factor. And we said that factoring, when we describe that, is really just undoing distributing. But sometimes the common factor, the thing that these two terms have in common, is actually a group of terms. So for example, in this problem right here, even though it looks a little bit more complex, there are still only two terms in this problem. The first term would be the 3x parentheses x minus 2, and the second term would be the 7 parentheses x minus 2. The reason that those are the two separate terms is that terms are always separated by pluses and minuses. So since this is the first time and the only time that these two things are separated by a plus sign, that's where we split the terms apart. Now if we look at those two terms and we say, what do they have in common? You'll notice that the first term, the part inside the orange box, has an x minus 2. And the second term, the part inside the blue box, has an x minus 2. So this time, this group, x minus 2, is the common factor. Now, just like before, we're going to start by writing down the common factor, x minus 2. And then we're going to put a parentheses, and we're going to divide by that common factor. We're going to take that out. Well, when you take out the x minus 2 from what's inside of the orange box, all you have left is 3x. When you take out the x minus 2 from what's inside of the blue box, all you have left is plus 7. So your final answer would just be x minus 2 parentheses 3x plus 7. Now let's take a look at a couple more examples. So the first step here is going to be identifying the two separate terms. In this problem, the first term would be the 2x squared parentheses 7x minus 5, and the second term would be the 3 parentheses 7x minus 5. Now if I look at what these two terms have in common, if I look at the first term and the second term, they both have the parentheses 7x minus 5. So I would write that down first. That would be the common factor. And now I need to figure out what's left. Well, if I take the 7x minus 5 out from the first term, all that's left is 2x squared. And if I take the 7x minus 5 out from the second term, all that's left is a positive 3. So my final answer would be 7x minus 5 parentheses 2x squared plus 3. Let's try one more example. So the first term would be 3x parentheses 4x plus 2, and the second term would be negative 2 parentheses 4x plus 2. Now if I say, what do they have in common? What do they both have that I can take out? They both have the parentheses 4x plus 2. So if I say, well, now what's left over, the 3x would be all that is left from the first term, and the minus 2 would be all that is left from the second term. Now, sometimes it seems like terms of a polynomial don't have anything in common. When this happens, we can make our own groups and look for common factors. Now, as a hint, you should always make sure your terms are in descending order before you start, or else this method sometimes has issues and it doesn't work. So let's take a look at this example. In this example, there are 4 different terms. So the first thing I'm going to ask myself is, do these 4 terms have anything in common? Well, since the last term does not have an x, I can't take out of any common factors from those 4 terms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my own groups. I'm going to put a box around the first 2 terms. That's going to be one group. And I'm going to put a box around the second 2 terms. That's going to be another group. Now what I'm going to do is look at each group separately. So let's look at just the orange group first. If I just look at these two terms and I say what do they have in common, the answer would be x squared. And if I look at taking that out from just the first two terms, what's left over would be x minus 3. Now if I look at the second group and I say what do those have in common, so I'm only looking at the blue group, I would say, well, they're both divisible by 2. So I would put positive 2, and it's very important to include the positive or the negative if necessary, parentheses, what's left over, and that would be x minus 3. Now if I look at this new problem, it looks a lot like the problems we were just doing. So again, if I look at just the orange terms as one group and just the blue terms as another group, both groups have an x minus 3. So I would write down the x minus 3 as my common factor, and then what's left over from the first group would be x squared, and what's left over from the second group would be a positive 2. And that would be my final answer. Now we call this factoring by grouping because we're putting things into groups to make common factors easier to find. Let's take a look at number 1 here. Now in this problem, again, we need to start by putting our terms in descending order. We were really lucky this time, because I made this example purposefully to work this way, that this one was already in descending order, but this one is not. So the first step is going to be to rewrite it into descending order. Now when I do that, I'm going to have the x cubed first, then the 2x squared, then the minus 5x, then the minus 10. Then I'm going to make groups. So the first two terms are going to be in a group together, and the second two terms are going to be in a group together. I'm just going to put them inside their own boxes. Let's look at just the orange box. So inside this box, those two terms can both be divided by x squared. Then if I look at what's left, I have x plus 2. Now I'm going to pretend the orange box isn't even there, and I'm going to look at just the blue box. So if I look at what number would go into both of the terms in the blue box, the answer would be negative 5. And the reason I'm using a negative is because we said before, if your first number is ever negative, then you divide everything by the negative. So then I would have left over x plus 2, because negative 10 divided by negative 5 would be positive 2. Now I'm going to look at what I have here. If I look at these two terms, so all the orange stuff, and if I look at all the blue stuff together, they both have an x plus 2. So I would write down the x plus 2 first, and then I would say, okay, well, when I take that out, what's left over? In the orange box, if I take out the x plus 2, all that's left is x squared. In the blue box, if I take out the x plus 2, all that's left is minus 5, and I'm done. Last but not least, problem number 2. First, I'm going to check for descending order, but these are already in descending order, so I'm not going to have to do any work to rearrange this. What I'm going to do is just group the first two terms together into a group and group the second two terms together into a group. Now, if I ask myself, what can I divide both of the orange box's terms by? I would have 8r squared, parentheses, and if I divide by that, I would have r minus 8. Now, if I look at just the blue terms, they don't really have anything in common. Like, there's nothing that goes into the invisible 1 and an 8. So when there's nothing in common, our rule is going to be to just factor out a 1. If I divide everything by 1, I still have r minus 8. Now, these terms both have an r minus 8. So when I say to myself, hey, what's the common factor now for these two terms? I would say r minus 8, parentheses, and then I would have 8r squared plus 1. And I would be done. All right, that is it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will definitely be practicing this in class tomorrow. Have a great day.